I have not the shadow of a hope anywhere else. Personally, I could never have overcome my own sinfulness. I tried and failed. My evil propensities were too many for me, till in the belief that Christ died for me, I cast my guilty soul on him, and then I received a conquering principle by which I overcame my sinful self. The doctrine of the cross can be used to slay sin, even as the old warriors used their huge two-handed swords and mowed down their foes at every strike. There is nothing like faith in a sinner's friend. It overcomes all evil. If Christ has died for me, ungodly as I am, without strength as I am, then I cannot live in sin any longer, but must arouse myself to love and serve him who hath redeemed me. I cannot trifle with the evil which slew my best friend. I must be holy for his sake. How can I live in sin when he has died to save me from it? There was a day, as I took my walks abroad, when I came hard by a spot, forever engraven upon my memory, for there I saw this friend, my best, my only friend, murdered. I stooped down and sat upright and looked at him. I saw that his hands had been pierced with rough iron nails, and his feet had been rent in the same way. There was misery in his dead countenance so terrible that I scarcely dared to look upon him. His body was emaciated from hunger. His back was red with bloody scourges, and his brow had a circle of wounds about it. Clearly could one see that these had been pierced by thorns. I shuddered, for I had known this friend full well. He never had a fault. He was the purest of the pure, the holiest of the holy. Who could have injured him? For he never injured any man. All his life long, he, quote, went about doing good, unquote. He had healed the sick. He had fed the hungry. He had raised the dead. For which of these works did they kill him? He had never breathed out anything else but love. And as I looked into the poor, sorrowful face, so full of agony, and yet so full of love, I wonder who could have been a wretch so vile as to pierce hands like his. I said within myself, where can these traitors live? Who are these that could have smitten such a one as this? Had they murdered an oppressor, we might have forgiven them. Had they slain one who had indulged in vice or villainy, it might have been his desert. Had it been a murderer and a rebel, or one who had committed sedition, we would have said, bury his corpse. Justice has at last given him his due. But when thou wast slain, my best, my only beloved, where lodged the traitors. Let me seize them, and they shall be put to death. If there be torments that I can devise, surely they shall endure them all. Oh, what jealousy, what revenge I felt. If I might but find these murderers, what would I not do with them? And as I looked upon that corpse, I heard a footstep and wondered where it was. I listened, and I clearly perceived that the murderer was close at hand. It was dark, and I groped about to find him. I found that, somehow or other, wherever I put out my hand, I could not meet with him, for he was nearer to me than my hand would go. At last I put my hand upon my breast. I have thee now, said I, for lo, he was in my own heart. The murderer was hiding within my own bosom, dwelling in the recesses of my innermost soul. Ah, when I wept indeed, that I, in the very presence of my murdered master, should be harboring the murderer. And I felt myself most guilty while I bowed over his corpse and sang that plaintive hymn. 'Twas you, my sins, my cruel sins, his chief tormentors were. Each of my crimes became a nail, and unbelief the spear. Amidst the rabble-rout which shouted the Redeemer to his doom, there were some gracious souls whose bitter anguish sought vent in wailing and lamentations, fit music to accompany that march of woe. When my soul can, in imagination, see the Savior bearing his cross to Calvary, she joins the godly women and weeps with them, for indeed there is true cause of grief, cause lying deeper than those mourning women thought. They bewailed innocence maltreated, goodness persecuted, love bleeding, meekness about to die. But in my heart has a deeper and more bitter cause to mourn. My sins were the scourges which lacerated those blessed shoulders, and crowned with thorns those bleeding brows. My sins cried, crucify him, and laid the cross upon his gracious shoulders. His being led forth to die is sorrow enough for one eternity. But to my having been his murderer is more, infinitely more grief than what poor fountain of tears can express. Why those women loved and wept, it were not hard to guess, but they could not have greater reason for love and grief than my heart has. Nain's widow saw her son restored, but I myself have been raised to newness of life. Peter's wife's mother was cured of the fever, but I of the greater plague of sin. Out of Magdalene 7 devils were cast, but a whole legion out of mine. Mary and Martha were favored with visits from him, but he dwells with me. His mother bare his body, but he is formed in me. Quote, the hope of glory, unquote. In nothing behind the holy women in debt, let me not be behind them in gratitude or sorrow. Love and grief my heart dividing, with my tears his feet I'll lave. Constant still and high abiding, weep for him who died to save. William Huntington says in his autobiography that one of the sharpest sensations of pain that he felt after he had been quickened by divine grace was that, quote, he felt such pity for God, unquote. I do not know that I ever met with the expression elsewhere, that it is a very striking one, although I must prefer to say that I have sympathy with God in grief that he should be treated so ill. There are many men that are forgotten, that are despised, that are trampled on by their fellows, but there never was a man who was so despised as the everlasting God has been. Many a man have been slandered and abused, but never was man abused as God has been. Many have been treated cruelly and ungratefully, but never was one treated as our God has been. I, too, once despised him. He knocked at the door of my heart, and I refused to open it. He came to me,